He laughed when the old woman stepped through the gym doors, but before the hour was over, no one in that room would dare laugh again. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Rain tapped softly against the front windows of Iron Ridge Jiu-Jitsu Academy as the evening class gathered on the blue mats. The place smelled of disinfectant, rubber flooring, and hard work. Fluorescent lights reflected off framed metals lining the wall, each one a reminder that this gym valued winners and little else. Students stretched in clusters, laughing loudly, comparing belts, trading stories about tournaments and tap-outs. In the center of it all stood Brad Mercer, 32 years old, broad-shouldered, black belt tied perfectly at his waist. He loved attention the way some men love sunlight. When he spoke, people listened. When he smirked, others joined in. And when the glass door opened behind him, his next source of amusement quietly stepped inside. She was small, maybe 5'3", wearing a beige raincoat and carrying a faded canvas tote bag. Her silver hair was pinned neatly behind her head. She looked to be in her late 60s, perhaps older. Water dripped from the hem of her coat onto the entry mat as she paused, taking in the room with calm gray eyes. The conversation slowed. Then came the whispers. "Is she lost?" one student murmured. "Maybe looking for yoga next door," another said. Brad turned, followed their gaze, and chuckled. "Evening, ma'am," he called loudly, his tone coated in mock courtesy. "This is a Jiu-Jitsu academy. Pilates is 2 doors down." Laughter scattered across the room. The woman did not flinch. She removed her coat carefully, folded it over one arm, and revealed plain training clothes beneath it, simple navy pants and a white top with no logos, no rank, no attempt to impress anyone. "I'm in the right place," she said softly. Her voice was steady enough to cut through the noise without ever rising above it. Brad exchanged a grin with 2 younger belts beside him. "You here to watch your grandson train?" More laughter. The woman walked to the shoe rack and placed her sensible walking shoes side by side as if she had all the time in the world. "I'm here for class." A hush fell for half a second before the room erupted again. Even students trying not to laugh failed. Brad spread his arms theatrically. "Well then, this should be inspiring." Coach Darren Pike emerged from the office, clipboard in hand. He was a former competitor with cauliflower ears and a schedule to keep. "What's going on?" Brad pointed toward the newcomer. "We got a late registration." Darren looked the woman up and down, clearly unsure whether to object or apologize. "Ma'am, beginner fundamentals started at 6. Advanced class is now." "That's fine," she replied. "I prefer advanced." Several heads snapped toward her. Brad's smile widened into something sharper. "Confident too." Darren rubbed the back of his neck. "Name?" "Margaret Hayes." He wrote it down, skeptical pen scratching across paper. "Any experience?" Margaret glanced at the wall of medals, then back at the mats. "A little." Brad laughed so hard he slapped his own knee. "A little," he repeated. "Perfect." He stepped closer, voice lowered just enough to feel personal. "Hope you brought good health insurance." Margaret met his eyes for the first time. There was no anger there. No fear either. Just patience. The kind that makes arrogant people nervous, though Brad did not recognize it yet. She set down her tote bag near the wall. As it touched the floor, the room somehow felt quieter. And for reasons no one could explain, even the music playing overhead suddenly seemed too loud. Coach Darren Pike glanced at the clock, then at the 20 students waiting on the mat. Iron Ridge ran on routine, and routine did not make room for surprises. Yet Margaret Hayes stood near the wall with her hands folded lightly in front of her, as calm as if she were waiting for a bus instead of facing a room full of skeptics. Darren cleared his throat. "All right. Warm-ups first." The class jogged in circles around the mat. Shoes squeaked in the hallway beyond the glass doors. Rain still tapped outside. Margaret joined the line without complaint, moving at an easy pace. Brad Mercer jogged backward just long enough to smirk at her. "Need a walker, ma'am?" A few students laughed. Margaret said nothing. She simply kept moving, each step measured, neither hurried nor strained. Darren led stretches next. Neck rolls, hip turns, shoulder mobility. Younger students groaned dramatically. Margaret completed each movement with surprising range, smooth and controlled, as if her joints had long ago made peace with discipline. One purple belt named Jenna noticed first. She stopped mid-stretch and whispered to the student beside her, "She moves better than half of us." Brad heard it and scoffed. Flexibility is not fighting. Then came break falls. Students practiced safe ways to land and recover. Most slapped the mat hard, trying to sound impressive. Margaret lowered herself with quiet precision, touching the mat as gently as a leaf touching water. No wasted motion. No noise. Darren watched her twice, then a third time. Something in his expression shifted. "Partner drills," he announced. Groans and chatter filled the room as students paired off. No one moved toward Margaret. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others pretended to adjust belts or check phones. The message was clear enough. Brad spread his hands theatrically. "Looks like everyone is intimidated." More laughter followed, thinner this time. Darren frowned. "Jenna, pair with Margaret." Before Jenna could respond, Margaret lifted one hand politely. "If it is all right, I would rather work with him." She nodded toward Brad. Silence landed fast and heavy. Brad blinked, then laughed louder than necessary. "You hear that? She picked me." Darren hesitated. He knew Brad's ego often created problems. He also knew refusing now would only feed the room's tension. "Light technical drilling only," he said firmly. "No nonsense." Brad bowed with exaggerated respect. "Of course, coach." Margaret stepped onto the center mat. She removed her glasses and folded them carefully beside her tote bag. Then she tied back a loose strand of silver hair with a plain elastic band from her wrist. The room watched every movement. Students drifted closer, pretending to stretch while forming a loose circle. Phones appeared discreetly near waists and pockets. Brad bounced on his feet like a showman before a crowd. "Do you know what a guard pass is?" he asked. "Do you know what balance is?" Margaret replied softly. A few students exchanged looks. Brad's smile tightened. Darren crossed his arms. "Start from standing grip entries. Slow." Brad reached forward casually, certain this would end in embarrassment for her and applause for him. Margaret shifted half a step, barely enough to notice, and his hand found empty space. The room made a small sound all at once. Brad tried again, faster this time. Again, nothing but air. Margaret did not retreat. She simply changed angles, like someone stepping around rain puddles. Jenna's eyes widened. "No way," she whispered. Brad's face reddened. He was no longer performing. He was trying. And for the first time that evening, the laughter had completely disappeared. Brad Mercer stood frozen for half a heartbeat, more offended than surprised. In every room he entered, movement usually bent around him. Here, in front of his own classmates, it had bent around someone else. He forced a grin that fooled no one. "Lucky footwork," he said, loud enough for the circle to hear. Margaret Hayes adjusted her stance by an inch. Sometimes luck arrives after years of practice. A few students looked down to hide smiles. Darren Pike stepped closer. He had seen enough mats, enough egos, enough hidden talent to know when something unusual had entered the room. "Keep it technical," he warned again. Brad nodded sharply, but his jaw had tightened. He reached in a third time, slower now, trying to secure a simple sleeve grip. Margaret allowed the contact for a moment, then turned her wrist with such small precision that his hand slipped away as if it had grabbed smoke. The room went silent. Brad lunged to recover position, but Margaret was already standing at a new angle, neither hurried nor dramatic. She was not escaping him. She was teaching him distance without saying a word. Jenna whispered again, this time to herself. She is reading him. Brad heard that too. Humiliation has a sound when it enters a room. It is the absence of laughter. Enough games, he snapped. He squared his shoulders and circled harder, feet slapping the mat. Students stepped back to widen the ring. Phones rose a little higher. Margaret remained centered, hands relaxed, posture easy, eyes calm behind the lines of age and patience. Brad feinted left, then stepped right, trying to corner her near the edge. She pivoted once and he found himself facing the wall of mirrors instead of his target. Several students gasped, then quickly looked away. Darren said nothing, but his crossed arms tightened. Brad's ears had turned red. "Stand still," he barked. Margaret tilted her head slightly. "Why?" Even Darren nearly smiled. Brad rushed forward again, determined now to force some kind of dominant position, any position that would restore the story he had been telling about himself. Margaret moved one step backward, inviting momentum. Then one step sideways, guiding it elsewhere. Brad stumbled past, caught himself, and turned to see half the class staring in disbelief. No one laughed this time. They were too busy learning. "Who are you?" he demanded. Margaret's answer came as softly as rain on the windows. "Someone who paid the drop-in fee." The students burst into startled laughter, and Brad's face darkened. He had wanted an audience. Audiences are dangerous when they stop being yours. Darren finally stepped between them. "That is enough standing entries. Reset." Brad pointed toward the mat. "No. Ground position. Right now." His pride was speaking faster than his judgment. Darren opened his mouth to object, but Margaret spoke first. "If coach allows it." Every eye turned to Darren. He studied her for a long moment. There was no recklessness in her tone, no need to prove anything. Only certainty. "Controlled pace," he said at last. "The second I say stop, you stop." Brad dropped to the mat quickly, eager to reclaim control where he felt strongest. He motioned with both hands. "Come on then." Margaret knelt across from him with the ease of someone setting down groceries. She placed her glasses neatly beside the wall again, then settled onto the mat as if she had done it 1,000 times. Brad reached forward, confident once more. Ground was his world. This would be different. Margaret looked at him kindly, almost sadly, as if she had seen men lose to themselves many times before. The music overhead ended. No one bothered to restart it. In the heavy quiet of Iron Ridge Academy, even breathing sounded loud. Brad Mercer reached first, eager to restore order to a story that had slipped from his hands. He moved from his knees, trying to secure control with speed and pressure, but Margaret Hayes did not meet force with force. She met it with timing. Her hands touched his wrists lightly, guiding rather than resisting, and suddenly Brad was adjusting instead of attacking. Students leaned in without realizing it. The room had become a classroom. Darren Pike crouched near the edge of the mat, eyes narrowed with professional focus. He no longer looked annoyed. He looked curious. Brad shifted to his left, trying to trap one of Margaret's arms. She turned her hips an inch and created space where none had existed a second before. Brad frowned. He tried again, more aggressively this time, and once more found himself chasing a position that kept disappearing. Margaret's breathing never changed. Calm in competition is a language experts recognize instantly. Jenna recognized it now. She is 3 moves ahead, she whispered. No one answered because everyone was thinking the same thing. Brad finally managed to grab hold of Margaret's sleeve and straightened with relief, as though he had captured proof that the world still made sense. Got you now, he muttered. Margaret looked at the hand gripping her fabric. Do you? She asked softly. Then, with a motion so small half the room almost missed it, she shifted her shoulder line, rotated her wrist, and redirected his balance. Brad's posture broke. His eyes widened. In trying to hold her, he had overcommit himself. Margaret flowed into the opening like water finding a crack in stone. She did not rush. She did not strain. She simply arrived in the exact place she intended to be. Darren's mouth parted slightly. Clean, he murmured. Brad tried to scramble back to center, but now he was reacting, and reaction is expensive when composure has already been lost. Margaret adjusted once, then twice, each movement efficient enough to look effortless. Her knees and hands formed angles that closed options before Brad could choose them. Students who had trained there for years were seeing details they had never been taught. How is she doing that? One white belt whispered. Because she is not fighting him, Darren said quietly, almost to himself. She is guiding him. Brad pushed upward in frustration, trying to power free. Margaret anticipated it and changed direction with him, using his urgency as if it belonged to her. A ripple moved through the crowd. This was no accident, no lucky trick, no strange beginner moment. This was mastery wearing plain clothes. Brad's breathing had grown louder. Sweat darkened his collar. Margaret's expression remained kind, almost patient, like a grandmother waiting for a child to solve a puzzle alone. Slow down, she told him. The advice only angered him more. He lunged into one final burst of effort, determined to reclaim dignity if not control. Margaret shifted underneath the motion, aligned her frame, and in one seamless sequence placed him in a secure hold so precise it looked gentle. Brad froze. Then he tapped the mat 3 times. The sound echoed like a dropped coin in church. No one moved. No one spoke. 10 seconds passed after the tap before anyone remembered to breathe. Darren stood up slowly. Jenna covered her mouth. A phone slipped from someone's hand onto the padded floor. Brad stared at the ceiling, shocked less by losing than by how completely it had happened. Margaret released immediately and offered him a hand up as though helping someone from a chair. Thank you for the round, she said. Brad looked at her hand, then at the silent ring of faces around them. For the first time since she entered Iron Ridge, he had nothing to say. The silence after the tap lingered longer than the exchange itself. It settled over Iron Ridge Academy like dust after a storm, touching every face in the room. Brad Mercer remained seated on the mat, one palm behind him, chest rising fast, eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the ceiling lights. He had expected applause, maybe laughter at someone else's expense. Instead, he had become the lesson. Margaret Hayes still held out her hand. No triumph in her face. No smugness. No desire to make the moment hurt more than it already did. After a few seconds that felt much longer, Brad accepted it and stood. The room watched as if witnessing something fragile. Darren Pike stepped forward first. Everybody back to the wall, he said, but even his voice sounded different now, stripped of its usual edge. Students obeyed immediately. Respect had entered the room and no one wanted to be the one who disturbed it. Brad moved aside without protest. He could not meet anyone's eyes. Margaret retrieved her glasses, placed them back on gently, and smoothed the sleeve of her plain white top as though she had merely finished a warm-up drill. Darren looked at her with the careful expression of a man rearranging assumptions in real time. How long have you trained? He asked. Margaret considered the question. Long enough to know it never ends. Several students exchanged glances. That answer somehow revealed more than numbers ever could. Darren nodded slowly. Where? Margaret glanced toward the framed medals on the wall. Many places. Some no longer exist. Jenna stepped forward before she could stop herself. Ma'am, were you a competitor? Brad's jaw tightened at the word. Margaret smiled faintly. Once. Darren folded his arms. What name did you compete under? For the first time all evening, Margaret seemed almost reluctant. She looked down at the mat, then toward the rain streaking the front windows. Margaret Cole, she said quietly. Darren froze. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. He took one slow step back, then another. No way. Students looked between them, confused. Jenna frowned. Coach, who is that? Darren let out a breath that sounded like disbelief. Before most of you were born, Margaret Cole won 3 national masters titles and coached half the instructors who later opened gyms across this state. The room erupted into whispers. Phones lowered. Eyes widened. Brad stared openly now. Darren continued, almost laughing at himself. I watched old competition tapes of her transitions when I was 23. He shook his head. I learned from you and did not even know it. Margaret gave a small shrug. Tapes are generous. Memory improves everyone. A few students laughed nervously. The tension broke, but only slightly. Jenna stepped closer, or replacing curiosity. Why did you never say anything? Margaret looked around the gym, at the belts, the mirrors, the medals, the faces suddenly eager to honor what they had mocked an hour earlier. Because if respect only arrives after a resume, it is not respect. No one spoke after that. Even the rain outside seemed quieter. Brad finally found his voice, though it came smaller than anyone had ever heard it. I was out of line. Margaret turned toward him. He looked younger now, not because years had changed, but because arrogance had left him. Yes, she said gently. Then she added, but lines can be stepped back across. Brad swallowed hard and nodded. Darren clapped his hands once. Class change of plans. Everyone circles up. Students hurried into position, eager now for instruction. They had nearly laughed out the door. Darren looked at Margaret with open humility. Would you be willing to show us that sequence? She glanced at the clock. For 10 minutes. A grin spread across Darren's face. Best 10 minutes this gym has ever had. And as the students formed a respectful semicircle around the old woman they had dismissed, Iron Ridge Academy finally became the place it had always claimed to be. The students formed a clean semicircle around the center mat, sitting straighter than they had all evening. No one checked a phone. No one whispered. The careless energy that had filled Iron Ridge Academy earlier was gone, replaced by something rarer and far more useful, attention. Margaret Hayes stood in the middle of the mat with her hands relaxed at her sides. Under the fluorescent lights, she looked ordinary again, a small woman in simple clothes with silver hair and quiet eyes. Yet now everyone understood. That ordinary can hide entire worlds. Darren Pike stepped back and gestured respectfully. The floor is yours. Margaret smiled faintly. The floor belongs to whoever respects it. Even Darren lowered his head at that. Brad Mercer sat in the front row, belt loosened slightly, elbows on knees, saying nothing. For once, silence suited him. Margaret motioned for Jenna to join her. The younger woman hurried forward, nervous and honored at once. Good, Margaret said. Someone curious always learns faster. She positioned Jenna's feet by inches, turning one toe, adjusting one heel, then stepped away. Most people chase techniques because they are flashy. But techniques are only doors. Balance is the key. She demonstrated a simple shift of weight. Jenna nearly lost position without understanding why. The class murmured. Margaret repeated it slowly. You do not move people, she said. You invite them to move themselves. Darren smiled like a student again. Brad stared at the mat. For the next several minutes, Margaret taught with calm precision. Nothing dramatic. No secret moves. No mystical speeches. She corrected posture, timing, breathing, patience. Every lesson sounded small until students tried it and felt how much they had been missing. Do not fight strength head-on, she said. Strength loves that. She showed how tension in the shoulders weakens the hips. She showed how rushing creates openings. She showed how ego makes people heavy and predictable. Several students glanced involuntarily toward Brad, then quickly away. Margaret noticed and spared them all embarrassment by continuing without pause. The hardest opponent is usually inside your own chest. The room went still again. Those words landed deeper than any technique. Darren finally asked the question everyone else was holding. Why did you stop competing? Margaret folded her hands behind her back. My husband became ill many years ago. Someone had to care for him. Her voice remained steady, but softer now. After he passed, I taught children for a while. Then grandchildren arrived. Life gives different tournaments. No one moved. Even Brad lifted his eyes. Jenna spoke gently. Do you miss it? Margaret looked around the room, at the belts, the mirrors, the wet city lights beyond the front windows. Sometimes. But not the medals. Only the learning. Darren nodded slowly, as if memorizing every word. The 10 minutes ended, but no one wanted them to. Margaret picked up her tote bag and raincoat. Thank you for allowing an old woman to visit, she said. Please come back, Jenna blurted out. Several others echoed it immediately. Darren stepped forward. I mean this sincerely. Teach here whenever you want. No fee. No schedule. Just say the day. Margaret smiled at the sudden generosity. Perhaps next Tuesday. A cheer broke out, warm and genuine. Then all eyes turned to Brad when he stood and walked toward her. The room tightened, unsure what would come next. Brad stopped 2 feet away and bowed his head. I judged you before I knew you, he said quietly. I am sorry. Margaret placed one hand lightly on his shoulder. Then today was useful for both of us. Brad exhaled like a man setting down something heavy. She walked toward the door as the students parted without being asked. Rain still fell outside, silver beneath the streetlights. Before stepping out, she looked back once. Remember, she said, a belt only holds up fabric. Character holds up the person. Then she disappeared into the night, and no one in Iron Ridge forgot the lesson she left behind. The next Tuesday, rain did not come. Word did. By 5:30, the parking lot outside Iron Ridge Academy was fuller than it had been in months. Pickup trucks lined the curb. Sedans circled twice looking for space. Inside, students arrived early and actually stretched without being told. News travels quickly when pride gets humbled and wisdom walks out wearing sensible shoes. Darren Pike pretended to organize attendance sheets, but he kept glancing at the front door every 30 seconds. Jenna helped wipe down the mats twice. Even Brad Mercer was already there, sweeping the corners with quiet focus no one had ever seen from him before. He had tied his black belt neatly, but something in the way he wore it had changed. It no longer looked like a trophy. At 6 o'clock exactly, the door opened. Margaret. Hayes stepped inside carrying the same faded tote bag and wearing the same beige coat. Conversation stopped on instinct. Then, one by one, students stood. She blinked at the reaction. I hope class has not become formal, she said. A warm laugh rolled through the room. Darren walked over quickly. Good evening, coach. Margaret raised an eyebrow. That title belongs to those who do paperwork. Darren grinned. Then good evening, Margaret. Brad approached next, not swaggering now, simply walking. He held out a folded towel. I brought this for the mat edges. They get slick near the door when it rains. Margaret accepted it with a nod. Useful people are always welcome. The words hit him harder than praise. Class began with fundamentals. But tonight fundamentals felt new. Margaret paired students by temperament instead of belt rank. The impatient ones with the calm. The strong ones with the thoughtful. The timid ones with partners who encouraged rather than dominated. You do not only train bodies, she said. You train habits. She moved through the room correcting details with fingertips and short sentences. Relax your jaw. Breathe before you move. Do not hurry to be impressive. Students improved within minutes because they were finally listening instead of performing. Brad partnered with a nervous white belt named Luis, a college freshman who usually got ignored. Last week Brad would have treated him like furniture. Tonight he reset positions carefully, explained grips, and praised small progress. Darren noticed and said nothing. Some lessons become stronger when left unnamed. Midway through class, Margaret called everyone to the wall. Today we practice beginning again. Groans and laughter followed. She pointed to Brad. You first. He stepped forward, puzzled. Show the room the mistake you made last week. Heat rose to his face, but he obeyed. He reenacted the rushing grip attempt, the forced pressure, the impatience. Students chuckled kindly. Margaret nodded. Good. Honest memory is rare. Then she had him repeat the same entry slowly, with posture and patience. It worked cleanly. The room applauded. Brad looked stunned. Why could I not do that before? He asked. Margaret smiled. Because last week you were trying to win a story, not learn a skill. The room fell silent again. Darren looked away, smiling to himself. Near the end of class, a teenage girl named Maya lingered by the wall, clutching a borrowed belt. She had watched but barely joined drills. Margaret noticed and walked over. First class. Maya nodded. I almost left when I saw everyone so experienced. Margaret gently took the belt from her hands and tied it correctly. Everyone here was inexperienced once. Some simply forgot. Maya laughed softly and stepped onto the mat. When class ended, no one rushed for the door. Students stayed to clean, talk, and ask questions. Brad stacked pads without being asked. Darren updated the weekly schedule and added one new line in bold marker, Tuesdays, 6 p.m., Foundations with Margaret. Margaret saw it and shook her head. Foundations? Darren capped the marker. Yes. Because that is what you repaired. And in a gym once built on ego and noise, people were finally learning how strength is supposed to sound. 3 weeks later, Tuesdays had become the busiest night at Iron Ridge Academy. Students from other gyms began dropping in quietly, pretending they were only curious. They came wearing branded rash guards, expensive belts, and expressions that said they expected to evaluate an old woman. Most left taking notes. The parking lot filled before sunset. Inside, laughter still existed, but it sounded cleaner now. Less sharp. Less cruel. Margaret Hayes never asked for attention, yet the room organized itself around her presence the way furniture turns toward a fireplace. She arrived on time, taught on time, and left on time. No speeches. No self-promotion. No stories unless someone truly needed one. Brad Mercer had changed enough that people noticed before they understood why. He greeted beginners at the door. He cleaned mats without being asked. He no longer corrected people to show status. He corrected them to help. When new students learned he was a black belt, they were surprised. When older students remembered the man he had been, they were more surprised still. Darren Pike watched all of it with quiet gratitude. A gym can survive bad habits for years, but once respect returns, it exposes everything else that needs repair. One Tuesday evening, a black SUV stopped outside the academy. Several students glanced through the front windows. A tall man in a polished jacket stepped out, followed by two younger competitors carrying gear bags. The room recognized him instantly. Travis Cole, owner of a successful downtown academy and former regional champion. He entered with the confidence of someone used to being announced before he spoke. "Evening," he said loudly. "Heard there is a legend teaching hobbyists out here." Some students stiffened. Darren stepped forward. "Drop-in fee is at the desk." Travis smirked. "Relax. I came to meet Margaret Cole." Margaret was helping Maya retie her belt in the corner. She looked up calmly. "It is Hayes now," she said. Travis laughed too hard. "Still correcting people. Good to see nothing changed." The room sensed history immediately. Travis had the smile of a man who enjoyed old victories, whether or not he had actually earned them. Margaret finished tying Maya's belt before walking over. "You look well," she said. "I moisturize," Travis replied, drawing a few uncomfortable chuckles from his students. He glanced around the modest gym. "Never pictured you ending up here." Margaret folded her hands. "And yet here I am." Travis tilted his head. "You know they still talk about the state finals in '98. Some say if you had not withdrawn, you would have won." Darren frowned. Brad looked between them. Margaret's expression did not change. "Some people talk because silence asks too much of them." Travis's smile tightened. "Then let us give them something new to talk about." Friendly demonstration. Old times. The room went still. Darren immediately stepped in. "Not happening." Travis shrugged. "Afraid your Tuesday attraction is just nostalgia?" Brad took one step forward, but Margaret lightly touched his sleeve. He stopped at once. She looked at Travis for a long moment, not angry, not intimidated, simply measuring whether the moment could serve anyone besides ego. Then she turned away from him and addressed the class instead. "What is stronger?" she asked, proving someone wrong or helping someone grow. Students answered softly from around the room. "Helping someone grow." Margaret nodded. She faced Travis again. "Then no." The refusal landed harder than acceptance would have. Travis blinked, caught off balance by calm boundaries. He tried one more smile. "You got cautious with age." Margaret picked up a beginner's foam training pad from the shelf and handed it to him. "Hold this for Maya while she practices entries." A few students laughed before they could stop themselves. Maya, now smiling broadly, stepped forward. Travis stood there with the pad in his hands, unsure whether to leave or obey. The room watched the choice arrive. After several long seconds, he held the pad. Margaret nodded once. "Good. Everyone can begin somewhere." No one in Iron Ridge ever forgot the look on his face, because humiliation seeks witnesses, but humility changes them. Travis Cole held the foam pad while Maya practiced entries, and the room learned more from that image than from any seminar. Pride had walked in wearing polished shoes and left standing still for a teenager. To his credit, Travis did not throw the pad down or storm out. He stayed. He adjusted his grip when Maya asked. He listened when Margaret corrected his stance. Some faces in the room softened. Redemption often begins in moments too small for dramatic music. Class ended with sweat on the mats and a strange lightness in the air. Students stacked pads, wiped surfaces, and talked in low voices that carried gratitude instead of gossip. Travis approached Margaret near the front desk where she was folding her beige coat. "I was rude," he said quietly. "Twice, if we count the year '98. Margaret looked at him over the rim of her glasses. We should count honestly then. He almost smiled. I withdrew rumors after you left the tournament. I let people believe I would have beaten you. Darren, overhearing from across the room, froze with a spray bottle in his hand. Brad stopped rolling mats. Even the front door seemed to wait. Travis continued, voice lower now. Truth is, your husband collapsed in the hallway and you left before finals to get him to the hospital. I knew it. I said nothing. The room went silent. Margaret's face did not harden. If anything, it became gentler. He needed me, she said. That was all. Travis swallowed. I built part of my reputation on a lie of omission. Margaret nodded once. Then build the next part differently. No lecture. No punishment. Just a doorway. Some people never expect mercy, and when it arrives, it rearranges them more than shame ever could. Travis exhaled slowly, as if years had left his chest. Would you come teach at my academy sometime? Margaret slipped one arm into her coat sleeve. Only if your beginners get the front row. He laughed softly. Deal. After he left, Darren walked over still shaking his head. You could have buried him in front of everyone. Margaret buttoned her coat. People bury themselves often enough. Brad stood nearby, listening with the seriousness of a man who no longer wished to waste lessons. How do you stay so calm? He asked. Margaret glanced toward the mats where Maya and Luis were helping each other clean tape marks from the floor. Because I stopped confusing other people's behavior with my identity a long time ago. Brad looked down at his black belt, then untied it slowly and retied it with more care than before. Weeks turned into months. Tuesday foundations became the heart of Iron Ridge. Enrollment rose, but more importantly, so did standards no trophy could measure. Beginners were greeted by name. Advanced students rotated with newcomers. Trash got picked up without being assigned. Apologies happened faster. Egos lasted shorter. Darren eventually hung one new frame on the wall beside the medals. It held no gold plate, no ranking certificate, no tournament photo. Just a handwritten sentence from Margaret in neat blue ink, skill may impress a room, but character changes it. On winter evenings, students still asked how an unknown older woman transformed the academy in a single night. Darren always gave the same answer. She did not transform it in one night. She revealed what it had been missing. Margaret never asked for payment beyond the drop-in fee she insisted on leaving in an envelope at the desk. She never wanted social media clips. She never sold merchandise. She simply taught, then walked home through rain or snow with her faded tote bag swinging gently at her side. And every time the door closed behind her, the room stood a little straighter. Because they had learned the lesson people forget most easily: belts fade, applause fades, strength fades, but the way you treat others echoes longer than any victory ever will.